So, Anne, one of the big topics about this conference at the moment is the EBA report in response to the Commission request. And there's so many topics to unpack on that. But I think one of the most interesting from a rating agency perspective is extendables. Now, you've only heard rumour about what's being said, but can you just comment about what you're expecting on extendable maturities?
Okay. So just a little bit of context. The market now is dominated by the soft bullets, which have typically a 1-year extension on principal repayment. And the directive has been explicit that the extension is conditional on objective triggers. And typically these triggers are defined then in national legislation, which is great. Because the concern is if there are any maturity extensions that could be arbitrary or vague. All right. So what EBA has told us in advance is that it would be great to have a little bit of a reflection on the transparency of these triggers and the involvement of the supervisor in managing at some point, let's see when, if there is any maturity extension. It's a critical question. If at some point a maturity extension is triggered, the assessment from a rating agency is, was the trigger clearly defined? Was the trigger objective? Does it make sense? If it makes sense, then such maturity extension, say 1 year, offers a little bit of time for refinancing transactions and to secure redemption in a year time. If on the contrary, the extension was vague, arbitrary, sounds like at the discretion of the issuer, that is just like the opposite. That is a distressed debt exchange.
And those triggers, I mean, they're looking for objectives criteria. You look at all these programs. How do you look at them at the moment? Are you looking for objective criteria, or there's a lot of diversity out there?
Exactly. I think the harmonization has been great, but the directive has been principles based, and then it has given national discretion as to how these, for example, are documented. We have certain legislations where the triggers are written by the law, and the extension would also be subject to the supervisor approval. So that gives confidence, right? The triggers are written, and we know that there is a supervisor of the industry that clearly is concerned about potential financial instability. On the opposite, if you have a contractual arrangement, well, you need to go and read the contracts. But from a rating agency perspective or just pure analysis point of view, it's a bit time consuming. You need to be very careful. You need to go to multiple papers and to make sure that you're reading very clearly the triggers of this jurisdiction, this piece of legislation, or this contract. And that's where potentially a fine-tuning in the harmonization would be great, because it's a critical element, and I think simplicity would be better.
It would certainly make it much easier if it was all more homogenized, more standard across Europe.
Yeah.
Another topic, you were just on this panel, and you mentioned about climate risk affecting the underlying collateral. Now, we've talked about climate risk in energy-efficient buildings and the contribution to reducing carbon emissions. We haven't so much approached it from a threat to the collateral now. I'm guessing you're not a climate specialist, you're a risk specialist. How do you reflect climate risk in your analysis?
Yeah. So we definitely support ourselves. This is in the future, because today we don't do it, but we have opened our analytical minds to capture physical climate risk. We definitely need scientific data for the future that with scientific metrics can tell us approximately the likelihood of a particular region or location to be exposed to serious physical climate risk, say floods or fires, among others, because that can alter and diminish quite a lot the valuation of the underlying. So we need scientific data that is forward-looking, that hopefully is able to understand that the history of that data may not be that useful going forward, because the world and the climate appears to be changing and evolving. So we definitely need to have scientific data put into the credit framework. But the $1 million question for us is, if we can quantify a climate risk exposure, how do we migrate it into credit risk exposure? Do we haircut valuations, or what do we do?
The existing framework, the existing covered bond framework, for example.
Yeah, in the framework we can. So anything that is mortgage underlying, it can be an RMBS, it can be a cover pool, it can be a CMBS. We have a valuation and we can adjust the valuation. So the mechanism is simple, but the magnitude of the adjustment. And what we're trying to say is, like, we analyze portfolios. We are not going to be that precise as a climate expert, and we're going to be precise to recreate an appraisal on a particular property. We will have to have a view on a pool, you know, because really we are credit analysts. We will not be able, we have a limitation, so we will not become climate experts down to the property level. And lastly is that at the minimum, what our discussion paper is saying is like, our immediate goal would be to have a relative distinction. So let's say I have two pools, kind of like the same in terms of underlying country, LTVs, etc. But one seems to be far more exposed to floods than other ones. So let me just at least make an adjustment here that differentiates this pool versus others, because the whole migration of scientific data into credit adjustments is very challenging. So at least a relative distinction would be step number one.
So that then, if it reflects the collateral pool, presumably it's something which can be addressed with more over collateralization rather than actual downgrade risk, or?
Yes, no, exactly. And all this under the foundation, this is critical, that our analysis is on a pool that is still benefiting from insurance, right? Because imagine if a physical climate risk becomes so huge that the insurance industry is not prepared to cover, then obviously there's no way that we can fine-tune the analysis somehow. Yeah.
We've always had criteria in there about make sure the property is insured, but we've never thought about wide-scale systemic risks like that.
These are early days. It's very challenging. As a credit rating agency, at least we're just opening. We want this is principles-based, it's relative distinction, and let's say we need to evolve with all this data and to make sense of it, to be transparent towards the investor, which is again what Eva is kind of like saying. Yes. Eva is saying in the whole chapter of ESG, there is just another probably parallel stream, which is physical climate risk, where we appear to have more data and where we can be a bit at least transparent and do our best to make distinctions.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about, Juan, is the other big topic in Brussels at the moment is housing affordability. It's clearly a big problem for so many people in Europe. How do you see that playing out in the covered bond market? How's it going to affect us?
Yeah. When I collect views from this event and also from my work, it seems that in the Western world and Western Europe, there is a common denominator, which is an affordability crisis, housing affordability crisis, very low affordability indicators, particularly for the youngs. And everything points mainly on the supply bottlenecks.
Yeah.
So we have seen initiatives to alleviate demand. You can relax if you want LTV, so you can have public state covering
subsidies,
and that demand may be a short-term solution, but for the past 10 or 15 years, the level of supply, new construction is so residual that there's a huge bottleneck. So the way I see it is that the industry is a little bit, in terms of growth potential, slow, because the production of mortgage loans is slow, because obviously on the demand side of things there is a bottleneck. Now, but sooner or later, our societies will fix this problem, hopefully on the supply side. And supply, I mean, not only new construction, but the whole refurbishment of very old stock, right? There's a lot of stock that you can count it as available, but probably is not available if you need to put 50, 75K of refurbishment. If we solve the supply problem, which seems to me the priority, then obviously all that mortgage demand can obviously go through covered bonds for financing in the capital markets.
It's true. If you stimulate demand, you push up prices. But the two most obvious ways that I would think we can help is finance for developers and finance for refurbishments, neither of which naturally fit into covered bond portfolios. And people have, you raise concerns, for example, the rating agencies raise concerns about developer loans.
Yeah, no, it's true. Maybe those developer loans, I mean, that was the kind of legacy, and we learned the lesson, and is right that the community expects a prime, spotless residential mortgage pool. No, I understand. But I mean, in financing terms, could be the banking or could be capital markets. At some point, we need to bring back resources and financing. It can be for developers, or it can be for refurbishment, and then step number 2 is residential mortgages that come into cover pools. Yeah. I know. it would be counterintuitive to go back and visualize real estate development loans taking a large proportion of corpus. It would be on reverse.
Yeah, it's just obviously one of those topics that's going to keep coming up, and we're going to address at
It's a long
these
term.
events.
It's a long term issue.
Great to speak to you, Juan. Thanks so much for
Thank
coming.
you, Richard. Ciao.